we're going to talk about hybrid logistics, and we only have a half an hour, and we want Mark Schneiderman to join us too from D2L. D2L is kind of a setup for the hybrid logistics space. Really what's happening is centered around major systems like D2Ls. So I want to show his video really briefly, and then we're going to get into kind of where we're at with logistics and how this changes the environment and your systems. So let's do that first and call on Mark, and then we're going to get into some pretty intellectual stuff. So hopefully you have enough caffeine in your system and you've eaten lunch.
Brightspace is a learning management system that makes it easier for you to give each student a more personalized learning experience. And now you can do it with fewer headaches and in less time. It's one platform with a single sign-on to all the tools you need that works on any device and can be used to create a different experience for each grade level. The youngest students can use a portfolio specifically built for non-readers to share what they're learning. As they get older and busier, the activity feed shows them the latest updates to help them keep track of everything that's going on. And no matter what grade your students are in, it's simpler than ever to create lessons and check that content is aligned to standards. You can use materials from publishers, open educational resources, or bring them in directly from Google Drive. The social interface brings it all together in a way that's easy for anyone to use and keeps everyone connected: teachers, students, and their parents. With Brightspace, you'll be able to reach every learner in a way that supports their learning style.
Okay, and we're back. This is LeiLani Cauthen, and we have with us Gary from D2L. Gary, you want to say hi? Unmute yourself and say hi. Hopefully you're listening in. There you are.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Gary from D2L. You guys just saw the video there that LeiLani showed. D2L is the founder of Brightspace, which is an LMS system for K-12. We've done a lot of work with the Learning Council in the past. Some great webinars we've done, if you want to check them out. And yeah, we're excited to learn more about you guys. There's been some great conversations so far. And if you guys are interested in anything we're doing, feel free to send me an email. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. Thanks so much, LeiLani.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Okay, great. All right. Now, so let's get into hybrid logistics and kind of what's going on. So hopefully you're seeing my screen. Let me tell you statistically what happened in the pandemic. So, the Learning Council Research does this huge study every year. And in 2019, we were looking at the overall number of schools or loss in public traditional education. It was about 27%. The homeschooling environment was growing at 20% annually. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that that's where we were before the pandemic. Now, after the pandemic, mid-year, we closed our big national study, and we were already at an additional 3.6% on average had left traditional public. Now, some of that's charters, right, which are public, but that was another big loss for most schools. Actually, the real loss was closer to 15%. When we surveyed again in January, that number was 15%, because some of the schools thought, okay, we're going to get these kids back, but they didn't really get them back. Like, Dallas ISD was in that bucket. Los Angeles was in that bucket. So really, this number is anywhere between 33.6 and 42%. So if you think about 42%, nearing 50% of the United States population has left traditional public, it's a big clue that something is wrong. We all know it was all wrong during the pandemic, but maybe there's more to it than just the pandemic, because that's not the only reason people would leave. There's other things going on. So one of those things is the fact that the consumers in America, right after the pandemic started, had a spike in shopping for online learning. And that's including all learning objects, not necessarily textbooks, e-textbooks, but all the learning subscription sites and, some of that stuff schools use, but a lot of it's really direct to consumer off the app markets. That spiked by an extra $1 billion. And the consumer spend is already 2 to 1 on professional grade digital learning objects than school spend. So let's talk about that structure. So schools typically are structured around classrooms. So I want to show you this game. This is the game board. We played this in Dallas for our national gathering. It was a giant like foam core type board, like your mouse pad. And we gave everybody roles, and some were students on that little twister board in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are different subjects, you know, math, language, history, social studies, science. And you'll notice that it's a giant homeroom. This is kind of like Harry Potter world, like a house. Like you're in your house most of the time doing your studies, socially distanced. There's somebody overseeing you who is like a homeschool or a homeroom leader, house leader. There's separate areas for teachers to come swooping in, take you offline, pull you into a corner and have private meetings or go to a video chat or go to interactive whiteboard. But there's also classrooms. So classrooms still exist, but they're not necessarily assigned. This is an alteration in structure. This is really the heart of the future of hybrid logistics in order to manage kids that are physically there and kids that are not there. So that rearrangement of structure is not really new to a lot of schools. It's just new to most of the traditional public, who pretty much thinks that the way that you structure is through teachers. So what we're here to tell you is that the new definition of hybrid means through technology and a rearrangement of the teacher intersection for whole group and small group at very precision points. So I'm going to say that again. The real future in terms of transition is the intersection with teachers at precision points. So it doesn't necessarily mean competency for everything, although that would be great. It was so nice to hear from, Westminster Public Schools this morning. They're really fully competency based. Well, not every school is going to do that, or district's going to do that. So if you think in terms of pace based, you got all your materials all laid out in a brick path. Now you're paced through them. Maybe that's a login over here to this system or that courseware. Now go into the learning management system like D2Ls, or now go over here, go over there. But the attention is directed digitally rather than all the attention being directed only by the teacher, which is an enormous addition in traffic on the human teachers. And it's not using them very well. It doesn't use them for their real skill, which is their human interaction, inspiration of the students, and their ability to unravel misconceptions or non-understandings by the students. So if a student misunderstands something, that could be missed, even in a whole group experience. So that kid just doesn't get it, and 3 tests later, you try to unravel them for why they're still not getting math, and that's a lot of work. It requires a whole additional remediation thing. So this design. Not totally new, but new from the perspective of how technology will be able to facilitate it. So this is kind of a talk about what's coming. All right, so this was part of the math game. As you can see, it gave everybody instructions for where they would physically be every 30 seconds. The bell would ring, so to speak, and you'd have to move to your next piece. So that way you got a feeling for the dynamics of the motion in the model. Super fun too, by the way. So parents are still afraid and they don't want to come back, some of them. A lot of other ones want normal back. Now, I want to point out that the districts we have on these calls frequently who say, our students all just want normal back. I normally ask them, well, are you a wealthy district? You're part of the wealthy area of your county. What's happening? And normally that's what's happening. Wealthier parents have a tendency to want the exact same thing they had as kids for their kids because they succeeded in life. It's the less wealthy districts who have a tendency to go, what do you got? Okay, I'll take anything. I'll try anything. I just want to get ahead and I want my kids to move. What do you got? So that's really what's happening all across America. But most superintendents say today that normal, as in the old way we did things, grade and class structure, same schedule with a Carnegie unit, 45 minutes, that's not really coming back. It may be for many of them that they have some of that and then this different rail of online learning in the same environment. It's the crossover between those two that we're talking about now. What happens if you have one student who wants to be there only one day a week and everything else online, but they still need to be in some of those physical classes, but now they're going to be remote. This is kind of the Wild West of what schools are dealing with right now. And that's what hybrid logistics is really all about. So when we look at the difference between where we were before in terms of space and time revision, these are the ways space is changing. People are sectioning buildings. Even once the pandemic is really thought to be fully over, you're still going to have concerns. So you might have to remain the socially distanced model that you're trying to do. So you can't have all the kids in the building. A lot of schools can't. So you might section your buildings, your entrances. You might alternate buildings used by group. You might go to what we just showed you, which is house rooms and classrooms as meetings, because the house rooms can be much larger. They can be auditoriums. They can be transformed cafeterias, that kind of stuff. You might always have to do social distancing. You probably, most likely, will always have remote kids from here on out, because according to our last national survey, 20% of families enjoyed this and they don't want to come back at all. They want to be remaining remote permanently. There are some students who sort of went really well for them in quarantines. They actually flourished. They were maybe the quiet kid who sat in the back, or maybe the bullied kid. And now they, being able to study and have their own agency on their own, when they get into the conference meetings with teachers, they're like chatty, they're comfortable now. And 20% of students are going to ask you for that. And then there's also this micro-schooling trend, which is taking over local retail space and mitigating threat of spread by smaller units. And then also parents over development is just super popular right now in California. So then in terms of time, we're moving away from those traditional schedules to maybe even simultaneous teaching, which is kind of wild for a lot of teachers. Most of the Atlanta schools are doing this. It's very, very hard on teachers to try to teach kids that are socially distanced, and maybe they're like almost 30 feet away from you in some instances, where you're shouting. If you're not augmented by like Lightspeed's audio technology, you're shouting. And then you got kids on screen, so you can't walk around like you normally would. This is kind of wild for people. And then there's rotation schedules, AB days, AB weeks, staggered starts for the school year, altered daily block schedules. Some of the blocks are now, for some schools, 120 minutes long, and teachers are ordered, don't go past 20 minutes for your Zoom calls. That's too much. And then there's this whole idea, like I was just talking about, of auto cohorting kids based on pace, not necessarily competency, but it could be competency. And then auto calendaring. This is a little bit about, like, if you can think with the way Uber does things, it's like, I need a ride, ping the app, it auto finds me the right driver nearby, the driver accepts the transaction, comes over. So basically calendars the transaction. We have the transaction, then we're done, we go separate ways. That's what I'm talking about in terms of logistics. So the impact on teachers of all this is hard. I don't know how many teachers we have on the line right now, but please speak up, because this teach from home via video conferencing originally started out in most places as like, you're on video all day. This is really hard on people. Or you're trying to teach in the classroom, or only some classes on campus, and the rest of the time, maybe you're on video for kids that are remote. So you have like these different units and you got to toggle. A lot of places were doing frontline and backline teaching, which means they didn't have the lessons in digital. They didn't have anything organized. So they pushed a teacher out in front to just sort of like roll call and get people started on something, students started on anything, while the other teachers in the same subject quickly put together as many of the lessons as they possibly could. So that was working for a lot of places. And some of it worked so well that they kind of want to stick with that, which is wise, because that is a brilliant move in the direction of real personalization. If you have a frontline person doing the teaching, not as much whole group, and your backline is watching analytics and pinging the frontline teacher saying, hey, this one kid needs extra help on X. Can you please do this with them? So in other words, they're scripting out in front saying, hey, do this. That's brilliant. Anyway, there's also assigned roving. Some teachers are having to go out to neighborhoods and check on homeschoolers, maybe pods, people converted a garage somewhere. And then you got direct instruction on demand online. One of the interesting things about our national survey was that a lot of schools were already looking for online chatbots. They wanted to automate 24/7 homework help, maybe not with all their own staff, but outside help. You know, is there a math hotline we can give the students? Is there this or that? And one of the things early on superintendents were telling us is like, they caught their teachers basically still accepting phone calls till 11 o'clock at night to help with homework. No, they had to shut them down. We're like, listen, you can't work 24 hours a day. You need to sleep and you need to have your own life. So automatically that means that you're already living in what Kimberly and I were just talking about, which is, you know, a matrix world. As a school or district, you're going to have to start thinking about that 24/7 model and the fact that the people you have can't do 24/7. You shouldn't make them do that. Probably against union rules anyway. So how are you going to augment with outside services? So suddenly you're knitting together this sort of matrix network model of how you actually distribute and deliver learning. So when early on, Kurt Madden, who's the chief technology officer from Fresno Unified, one of my favorite guys, he said they don't have a captive audience anymore. They just admitted that right off the bat. They said we're going to have to be teaching with traditional, you know, with PPE in some instances, blended campus with remote learning, and some distance only, a little bit like Westminster was saying. So they wanted to make sure that everybody understood right out of the gate at the start of the pandemic, listen, as teachers, you're not a teacher in the lecturer traditional sense anymore. We don't want that. That's too much on you. You don't believe us right now, but trust me, you will later. You're going to be a coach and a mentor. That's really the role we want you to play. And we're going to stack the path for learning with all the lessons. So then you're just going to run. It's an interesting, different perspective. All right. So just checking my chat windows, see if I should unmute anybody. All right. So this is a eye chart, to say the least. I'll show you more of them as I have a lot to show you today. But this is sort of the lay of the land of all your technology things that are potentially out there, not by name, but by concept. Okay. So the orange boxes are all your hardware side, some of your unique hardware, like your audio enhancement, you absolutely have to have in classrooms right now, robotics and other stuff that plugs into computers, all your network stuff. And then over here in the middle at the top, you've got your portals, your paywalls, this new thing coming, hybrid logistics scheduling, a little bit about what Randa was just talking about, Kimberly, and what identity automation and ClassLink talk about. It's in that sovereign identity access management space. And then, of course, security and things teachers don't want to have to care about. But boy, as superintendents, you better be caring about this stuff. Data warehousing, learning object repositories, and analytics. Then you got this weird circle over here about independent contractors and outside services, like I just said. That's going to start happening more and more. And then you got to integrate all this stuff. And then you've got all your major systems in these green boxes below. And then over here in grades, you have unbelievable numbers of individual bits and pieces of things and subscription sites and ebooks and ebook platforms and full courseware and maybe PDFs and videos and just things. You have many things. There's 7,000 companies in this space, but if you add up all the individual learning objects or systems, it's in the millions. It's just majestic and it's very messy. And you might really screw it up in your district if you go like, these guys can be on Google over there and these guys can be on Microsoft over there. No, because what'll happen is that a parent has a kid in each school, different ages, and now they got to learn everything. And that doesn't work. And it sort of wrecks the continuity of operation anyway. So now you not only have to start looking at how your continuity of operations is digitally, but you also have to look at workflow. This is a key concept I want you to have as a takeaway. Workflow is everything in 2021. The flow of the work, how it's accessed, and how well it and easily it can be navigated is the essential component to online learning and blended and hybrid. Because the old world of distance learning, its biggest drawback was people couldn't figure out where they're supposed to be and where they're supposed to get their stuff. That was the biggest drawback. So you also have over here on the other side, this thing happening with auto cohorting. Some of it's happening inside courseware. We're now talking about it above that as an operational component across all things you use. Also auto distribution of resources, huge time waster for teachers. And then auto calendaring all your live interaction, which is a presumptive flip of how you do calendaring and scheduling right now. All right. So just a little side note on screen learning. Optimus 4.5 hours, biggest study ever. You can hit that link. You guys will be getting these slides. 40% of that, which is only about 2.5 hours that you have during the day, can be, lecture-based kind of stuff. You need to leave 2 hours out of that for kids to use on their own at night. And then 60% of it could be project-based, whole group, including video conferencing, small group. But this 60% of the time, if it's on the screen, if it's not hands-on, it needs to be interactive. It needs to be the student is doing something rather than just passively receiving something. All right, so the big questions you have are space, people, workflow, and time. You think it's something else, but this is what it really is. So let's overview these problems. So teachers right now are doing live teaching plus virtual teaching in most instances. In that, they're having to distribute and collect all assignments digitally. Now, in the physical world, that was easy. It was like pass some papers out or just write it on the board what you're supposed to go study tonight, chapter 4, blah, blah, blah. Now, the traffic digitally is something that's often overlooked by leaders. You totally don't see it, but it's a massive amount of traffic just to distribute and collect, distribute and collect, distribute and collect. Go here, now go there, now go log in over here. What are you logged into over there? The traffic is huge. And then you have to also manage, like ClassLink was showing you, which things you have access to, where and what. That administrative burden is more than you might think, because you'll forget something as a teacher and you'll be like, oops, I was supposed to be teaching this and I didn't even have it in all of their logins. So now I got to go over here and make sure that it's in there and then push it over there. And it's a thing. And then also individual communications, which just quadrupled with all the parents involved, because it's not just parents. For many families, it was parents and grandparents. And maybe older siblings even getting involved in the whole fray. So if you really peel back the covers, this traffic is major and it's overlooked for what's happening as you transition to digital. And the reason for that is you're kind of trying to do digital in a manual way. If you're just using Google Docs or some low value system and you're not already up to the full grade LMS and the real courseware, and everybody's doing everything with PDFs everywhere and videos, or they're trying to lecture online, that's where the traffic goes so high that it overwhelms teachers. So really, we're moving in terms of model away from this bureaucratic structure, which basically was a manufacturing line through grades and classes. And we're in the middle of this mutation moment. And the mutation is hardest on school districts who don't understand they can't remain in mutation mode. Mutation mode is kind of like, you're trying to satisfy too many people at once. And you're not built for that. You can't be built for one thing and also be built for another thing and easily have a low cost structure or an efficient structure. You're generally pulled in too many directions. So where it's really going is this asynchronous learning, distributed service model, a little bit like the matrix. So you're going to be using extra liminal resources, sources outside your limits, like you're going to buy software, you're going to use people from far, far away, and you're going to build it so that the navigation of it still includes live teachers, but it's doing that in a very efficient way using algorithms, a lot like Uber or Amazon can get you a box of ice cream in under 2 hours on your front doorstep, or FedEx can get a package anywhere in the world in 24 hours. This is logistics, and logistics is the newest science to not really be fully understood yet by education, but that mutation middle ground is going to keep wearing you down until you feel like you have to move to this other realm. Okay, so it looks like we have a chat from someone named Kevin. If we can unmute Kevin, that would be great. So we're going to unmute you in a second here, Kevin. I'm going to go to the next slide while Doug is unmuting you. So I looked at traffic. Okay, it looks like you're unmuted, Kevin. Go ahead. Kevin?
Can you hear me there?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I actually happen to work with Jenny Gatto and the team there in Westminster.
Okay.
One of their remote workers. I work from Australia, but we are lucky enough to have moved down this competency-based path, which gives us those data points that makes that automation a lot more likely to happen. In a traditional system, it's difficult to have that data, to have the tech take over some of that content management, if you will. So we've been lucky in that regard.
Yeah, and it sounds like you are part of the matrix because you're working from a long distance, right?
Yeah, it's a difficult jump to get in there for all of us, but it's it pays out pretty well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think that that's the future. Yeah,
Yeah.
so because when I think about, just the teacher shortage, that's going to be it's huge. I mean, as a media institution, we've turned over 75,000 readers in just the last year.
Yeah.
And that tells us everything we need to know about the musical chairs going on out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so interesting. Okay, so pipe up some more as you see fit.
Will
So
do.
also something from Teresa. Teresa, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, I just listening to everything. It's very exciting because I know that many of our students are just bored with school, especially at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level, and then the sophomore, junior, senior level. And I feel like just listening to what you guys are doing, creating classes that are challenging, not only in that school building, but across the world. Allows for a student to possibly graduate 8th grade with high school credits and classes behind them, and possibly a senior to graduate with a high school diploma and an AA degree. I mean, that is very enticing for students. That's something that will get them farther ahead in life. And I just think that sounds like such a wonderful idea, and it kind of validates that I'm not crazy thinking that way anymore.
No, you're not crazy at all. Your mind has groped in the direction of how do we bring order to this madness,
Right.
and it's a different structure. This is the most misunderstood thing by school leaders right now. They
Absolutely.
think that they have to be structured with teachers as the center pin. Teachers, gotta love teachers, but it's a very inefficient model when they should be elevated and used again like an Uber driver, like
Right.
only in essential moments. So typically, if you look under the hood of the way a teacher is planning, if they're going to try to individualize, that means what resources? To me, to a lot of teachers, it means tweaking the existing resource so that they can have the same resources for every student. But like you were just saying, David, that doesn't work, especially with the language issues. So let's just pretend you're looking at a screen that's a total eye chart right now. But you're going to, up here, you've got Johnny, and then you got Isabella, and then that was getting to be too much. So you just grouped kids in group 1, group 2, and group 3. But this would be what it would mean to individualize which resources for which kid when in one subject to cover those standards. So managing that as a teacher means you'd have to log in over here to HMH, later on Imagine Learning, and down here for the other kids, you've got Mind Tracks for some, Little Pim for others, Imagine Learning for others over here, Reading Kingdom, some oddball lesson plan that you put together yourself. This looks like air traffic control to me. And it's not possible for human teachers to do this easily. This is the issue with how you're going to actually personalize learning pathways. So then you come to the realization that you got to lay the bricks for the pathways to be normalized, but within the steps, allow alternates in terms of what resource. And that's a lesson plan conundrum. Okay, so I just want to look at teacher-centric versus student-centric models. So if you move away from grading class structure to course structure is the model that the research is pointing to the most. Now, that doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be applicable all the way down to kindergarten. But even in kindergarten, you can typically have, the same human running those children, but it's like, here's your language course. And then if we do that, you take away some of these duties that are in this first box in the middle here, which most teachers have to do because they're running a class, which means they're running the classroom environment, which is all the time management, all the scheduling, all the data entry filing, coming up with all the lesson ideas, really all the discipline and everything else. Whereas you move towards a student-centric model, then what you're doing is the teacher is intersecting only at the moments of the teachable moment. Like that's the teaching intersection moment. Maybe it's a whole group lecture, because those will still be popular. A small group hands-on project where people do come together, maybe still socially distanced or whatever. But the use of the teacher is not everything. So the way that you move that structure is to move to that house or homeroom environment for learning, which may mean that the students that are always remote, they're still assigned to House Gryffindor or House Slytherin, but they, whatever you want to call your houses, but they're not physically there. They're just sort of notched into that house. And then when that intersection moment happens, it's auto-calendared for the cohort that's ready for it. Okay, this means pace and not necessarily always competency. Most schools can't go all the way to competency. They're going to be more oriented on pace. So here's the other part about this, that what you really want to be thinking with in terms of how you're going to plan a changed structure is how you're going to leverage the precision, the human qualities of teachers that are the most important to actually learning. And those things are not the same as they've been in the new structure as they were in the old structure. And that's sort of the main point there. So here's how lessons are done now. I'm going to go over this really quickly. You have your standards frameworks, then you plot them on the calendar. Normally this is done by the district level, and those land in document form, spreadsheet form, sometimes Google Docs, sometimes PDFs. And then the teacher then has to look at both the calendar for time and the samples from they're getting on the pacing for where they're at on the calendar to actually build their lesson plans and use up their own time. So when they're doing that, they're actually duplicating effort across the entire district. So all sixth grade teachers are basically doing the same thing. Checking my chat here, make sure I'm not going to miss anybody wanting to comment. Okay. All right. So then you have how it will be done in hybrid learning. So I'm going to walk you through this kind of slowly. The standards framework then goes into the plotting, but it's automated on a plotting calendar. So that the calendar at the pacing guide level is interactive with the lesson plan level. And the lesson plan level is when you first start out, pre-built normalized pathways. This is a little bit of like what David was talking about when he was talking about how he's going to structure, how they're going to do their whole layout in terms of hybrid learning. So a normalized pathway means this is the normal stuff you're going to study in this time sequence, and it's laid out in steps. So D on this slide is showing you, step one is read or do this, and do this curriculum module, log in over here, do whatever you're supposed to do. Then maybe step two, and these are just sample steps, is build this paper model of hands-on practice for the demonstrate math understanding or whatever. But then there's a step that is preset as a step to do a live lecture or something that is an intersection of the humans. Then that intersection moment accumulates whoever has reached it. So let's say the teacher said it at, I want to trigger the live lecture or hands-on moment I'm going to have as soon as 10 students reach this level. So the first one that enters that step 3 and gets to that, they may be told, well, we're waiting for the rest of your cohort. Please go study your other stuff. So they jump over and study other stuff. This is where plotting on the calendar is different because, again, it's all homeroom oriented. There's somebody overseeing that, and kids are all over the place on subjects. But as soon as the cohort is full, algorithms automatically trigger that Uberized moment, lock down the room, trigger the teacher's schedule, and trigger all the students in the cohort schedule to go, okay, good, 2:00, you guys are in this room. Then that moment occurs, then that cohort can move forward while the next cohort accumulates. This is very different as a model. And then, maybe the last step is independent Q&A, which is live chat. So that's just a little small sample of Uberizing and algorithmically inferring individualized pathways. What that also allows, obviously, is that if you have too many students running behind, that's where the teacher attention goes. Teacher attention is on I gotta, these cohorts are triggered, move them forward. These ones are running too slow. So that's where the attention goes to make sure students are caught up. So the experience of a true personalized pathway that uses auto cohorting, auto distribution, and auto calendaring. Auto cohorting, by the way, Scholastic is one company that does this. Some of the reading platforms do this inherent within their programs. Now we're talking to you about it as a sort of universal cap to all of the learning. So maybe you start at, like this slide shows, the student is pre-reading or they're studying for a social studies lecture. Their very next intersection gives them a stoplight because there's only 3 of them who've made it to this point and finished their reading, and they're in the first cohort. So they're told, skip over here to study another subject while the clock runs collecting more cohort. And once that cohort is full, it triggers the lecture, green light, lands on the calendar automatically. They get a pop-up notification. Hey, you need it in room 102. If you're remote, you will log in here to this particular video conferencing platform at this time. So then the teacher's teaching that particular live and maybe also virtual moment. And then after that, students are dispersed again to do whatever they're supposed to be doing. And if they go to their next step, it's maybe some virtual reality practice. Maybe they're doing a math proof and a math path, and they get their final test. But more importantly, they're auto-routed to their next step or next module. Maybe they get a badge for completing this particular one, and you can watch on a dashboard who's moving where and how they're going. So this is kind of complex, but actually very simple. It's step by step, and each step has to have notation on it for, is it live or is it something they can do on their own? A little bit like what David was just talking about. So if you were to view this sort of from an overarching 40,000 foot view, see this one little boy in blue, he's coming in via Wi-Fi from home. Other students are live on campus, and they're all on alternate routes doing different things. Principals have already told us they spend a lot of time watching dashboards. So you're going to have something like a dynamic real-time learning management going on where you're watching the motion and who's needing to be caught up and how far behind they are. And then physical activities occurring in preset auto calendar, auto cohorted activities going on. It's going to look chaotic. I actually visited with my camera crew one year a school in Southern California that when I walked into one of their classrooms, it was 2 classrooms smushed together. It looked like chaos, but it wasn't chaos. Some students were doing things individually on their own. Others were doing reading. They were all at different points. The one teacher and then there was a helper were administering this whole looking like chaos thing, but it wasn't chaos. That's kind of what you're going to see. So the whole thing about students in rows and, lined up to do things, totally gone. But it will all be personalized and all individualized. The way to start is normalized pathways. Normalized pathways set it up so that as you grow your operation, if you see a sticking point on any normalized path, you can build cul-de-sacs off of it. Like if this is the problem of their learning, then go over here and do this and then come back to the path. That's normal. So if you think about it, this isn't far from where we've already been if it's based on pace and not necessarily competency. If you have to go to all full competency, it's a totally much heavier lift in terms of making sure every student gets through. So I want to make sure anybody that's on the line, if you want to make a comment on this, you do. There's been a lot of work behind everything I'm showing you right now. But we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for teachers and schools? This means that when you think about hybrid learning, technology is not just a tool, like most educators say. They say, oh yeah, technology is just a tool. Well, yeah, but at the operational institutional wide level, it's an operational mechanics so that you can logistically actually personalize learning. It flips the institution from delivering, executing only through humans to executing through technology and arraying the humans in a much more efficient manner so that the art of their humanity is what's elevated and the human teaching becomes the thing that is utilized at its most perfect moment. And that hasn't really been done so far in most education. Teachers are sort of wrapped around doing a lot of things that aren't really teaching. They're doing a lot of other stuff. So that's really what we have to inspect and understand. So where this is happening right now in terms of the beta build is inside nostory.com. The beta should be out in about 2 months, so that it can integrate with a lot of other things. And the basic precept of it, so that it can demonstrate to a lot of schools and districts how they could run their calendaring, is the calendar breaks into a 4-level calendar: segments, programs, rotations, blocks, and then every step with your LMS auto cohorts within steps and does all the auto calendaring for you. And so everybody has their own personal calendar, but the 3 levels above it are organizational calendars, and they're all interacting algorithmically with each other. So right now, if you want to be involved in that work, it's part of the EduJedi's work. There's a lot of courses the EduJedi already offer, but if you just sign up to be an EduJedi, you're going to be part of the beta work for this logistics work. And also, thank you for joining this particular part of the conversation. You get a badge for being part of all this. So I want to go on and make sure that I ask David any comments or questions, if you're still on the line, about what I just showed you as sort of the basics of what's happening in hybrid logistics. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think certainly when the technology gets there, it will be, helpful. I mean, we think, we'll get to the day where, you'll say, computer, what do I need to do today? And it's going to, give you that playlist personalized to you and sync everyone together as needed to make it all happen for everybody. I mean, that would be a terrific place to be. I think right now we're still doing things, some pencil paper to make it work. But yeah, it's certainly, I could see it, going that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And like Mark was saying, School of One has done things like this for a long time. And Lammersville ISD is where you want to go next. And they're having to do a lot of this paper and pencil and stickies on a big board in order to figure out courses and who's going to be where. And this kid's only going to be on campus 1 day a week. And then here's how this is all going to roll. And the weekly schedule you were showing for how the day would break up for certain age groups. This is a lot of work, and it needs to be automated. So that's kind of what this is all about, is how do we do that without upsetting the apple carts people are already using? Like, because if you already have an LMS, you need that to integrate with a logistics piece so that you can transform and not be super duper only teacher centric, but centered around the student and use your teachers more wisely. Yeah, it's an interesting point that you're at, because you're trying to do a lot of this a little bit manually, and it's probably a lot of work.